Respect, honor, and respect, honor, and respect. Greetings and salutations. We're now sitting live and always in archive at your leisure and convenience to Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes, powered by, sponsored by NONVD, New Orleans National Voodoo Day. Please continue to visit us at www.vodouday.org, www.voodooday.org, to continue to receive more information and updates about National New Orleans Voodoo Day, our third annual National New Orleans Voodoo Day in 2026. We certainly appreciate your attendance, support for this podcast, for this platform. I'm certainly grateful for those of you who show up with us weekday nights at 9 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time to sit with myself and the beloved Queen Mother, Sister Toni Val Martinez. We are certainly grateful for you and your energy and your sacred Iyami. Welcome, beloved. How are you doing this evening?
Peace, beloved. I'm good. Boy, we had some rain today. I want to say we had some flooding today, and I slept through it.
Cindy. No, I didn't sleep through it.
I heard that thunder, and I'm like, oh, that sounds so good. And it just lulled me on to sleep. I woke up with one of my kids calling me, asking how the flooding was over here. I'm like, what flooding? And then I go on social media, and oh my God.
Yes, indeed.
And I saw you put up a post about the flooding in your area.
Yeah, I put up two posts. One about the flooding, and the other one about the lightning. I was in the middle of teaching Shango, Hevioso, other lightning deities, particularly from West and Central Africa. And then Joshua decides he wants to get up and go smoke a cigarette, and he opens the door, and the lightning almost hits directly as he's opening the door. You can see the video on my TikTok from like 4 different angles.
But it was I'm going to check that out.
It was very close. And it sort of made me think about something that our grandparents used to talk about, haints. Haints.
Oh, yes, them haints.
And how often I get requests today about people who perceive that they've been hoodooed, or someone's conjuring against them, or some kind of witchcraft is being, put on them. But often we neglect and overlook haints and how they have historically showed up as a part of generational curses, soul entanglements, often traumas and horrors of the past that show up again in the present moment. That movie, that horror movie back in the day, the black oh shoot, what was the name of that movie? And the guys ended up at the funeral parlor, and the funeral guide basically, tells them these elaborate stories.
I know the one you talk, Tales from the Hood.
Yeah, Tales from the Hood. So remember, there was the one particular story of the white governor or politician who was,
that was fashioned after David Duke.
Yes.
Who in Louisiana was running for governor, and he was a known Klansman and neo-Nazi in the state.
Well, I like how the creative writers worked the haints into that story by way of that painting. that mural on the wall. And when the mural comes to life, certainly, they turn into what we might first perceive to be voodoo dolls. But I believe that they were really being empowered by the haints of previous generations, those enslaved generations whose anger and trauma survived, and were somehow unleashed, unlocked in that moment through this character's, you know, obscene wickedness, but also by this underlying, sort of hoodoo woven in the story, underneath.
The painter, excuse me, the painter of the picture appeared to have trapped the anger of the ones who were posing for the portrait. It was a plantation type scene. And like you said, that anger and everything was fueled and caused at the time the haints, that generational anger, to bring those characters back to life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
at one time they were actual people
Right.
on the plantation. And his evilness, they just couldn't take it no more. And they
And I think
came back. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I think historically, just talk of the haints, I think kind of went away with Big Mamas.
Yeah,
As we lost Big Mamas, we've also lost this information and many of these stories, and the remedies that were often accompanied with the stories. Because I remember growing up, it was not uncommon for grandparents and other family members to take certain measures against the haints, especially as it related to children. They somehow expected children to be more sensitive, maybe, to the interference from haints,
yeah.
than adults. Maybe their innocence somehow would allow those uh, ancestral spirits to come through into the present time space.
Um, and Haints was also one of the major reasons that the big mamas in all their days, and the great big mamas and the grand big mamas, cleaned their house in the surrounding areas. They didn't also clean inside their houses to protect them. They cleaned in their yards and around their houses. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't uncommon to find um things under the steps, under the front porch, gree-grees made of sticks and string, fashioned in a certain way, placed there as talismans against the haints.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
know my mama had them under our back steps. Um, and I found it one time, and she said, "Put that back, put that back." And
Yes, indeed.
I was scared. I was scared. I dropped it like it was a hot potato. And she went and put it back where she specifically wanted it. And I remember her saying, "That's for them haints."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking her what was a haint. And it took her about 2 days to get back to that conversation.
Yes, indeed.
Sometime when I asked her certain things, I don't know, she didn't answer right away, but she came back to it, caught me off guard with, "Now you want to tell me."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was a
But I
common
guess
thing.
it was a time and place for everything. And
Mm-hmm.
after I had went and disturbed the talisman, wasn't the time to tell me about a hang.
Yes, indeed. And those protective measures often went hand in hand with gardening and access to herbs, plants, roots, at least in my experience.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. That's very true. If you often saw um a herb garden or something growing too close to the house to look like, it seemed out of place, it may well have been there to ward off certain things besides the obvious, like
hmm
rats and other parasites like that. But hanks were also considered parasites.
Right. And opportunistic parasites.
Yes, and the children were very susceptible because of their innocence and the ease with which Hanks could get to them because they were so innocent. And that's one thing I see now with the programming in the movies, like trolls and the images they portray in all the movies and stuff that have desensitized our kids to the thoughts of such things. They're not afraid of them anymore. In fact, they want to befriend them.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say I'm not quite sure if desensitized is even the right word because of what you just said. On the one hand, that's not real. That's entirely a figment of someone's creative imagination. But then there's this other sort of move to embrace and take on and make fluffy and friendly and cuddly, much of anything from the spirit realm, including vampires, werewolves, jinn, you know. And so it does, I think, make us, if not desensitized, much more susceptible to these
I
things.
remember I had a roommate and her daughter back in the early 80s, and we lived on First Street, right in the heart of those that worshiped Black Hawk, because that's where I first really learned who Black Hawk was and saw altars to him, and where a large majority of the spiritualist churches still were. And my roommate's daughter had a tremendous amount of hair on her head, and she was like 4 years old, and her mother was braiding her hair one day, and her daughter said, "There's a monster in the corner." So immediately we both look in the corner. At those days, I didn't have a TV in my house. So we talked a lot and sat in the same rooms with each other and the kids for conversation. And her mother was like, "Girl, what are you talking about? They ain't got nothing in there in that corner." And she was like, "Yes, it is." And she raised her free hand up and pointed in the corner.
Mhm.
And I immediately ran in the kitchen to get the ammonia.
Yeah.
I remember, and I was pouring the straight ammonia all in the corner. And my roommate was, "Oh, that's so strong. Why are you doing that?" But I came home one day, weeks after this, and my full grown roommate, she was sitting on the sofa with a butcher knife in one hand and the broom in the other. And I walked in the door and saw her like that. And I said, "Girl, what's wrong with you?" I thought someone had broken the house, tried to break in the house, and she was in there. And she said, there is something in this house. I'm like, something like what, a rat? I'm thinking she got the broom. And she said, no, some kind of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, she moved out. She was that afraid.
Yeah, Hanks can make you lose your mind.
And my answer to her was, quick, get a piece of paper and a pencil and see if it's trying to tell us something. I mean, I was like, she was from New York, by the way, and wasn't
But
used
Hank,
to all the goings on that was going on. But
but
she
Hanks are
claimed
never,
something.
but are never really good though.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't for her. She moved out. She was like, I can't stay here. She claimed that stuff was being moved around, stuff was missing, and she nobody in the house living had done it. Um, that particular day, she claimed to see something just move on its own clearly, not out the corner of her eye, and more than once. And she swore up and down that something was tickling her feet at night while she was asleep, waking her up.
Yeah, I can believe that, especially in certain neighborhoods uptown, the Garden District, just beyond the Garden, really all the way to the zoo.
Yeah, we lived
Um,
we lived 2 blocks off of St. Charles from the Garden District.
yeah, all those properties have ghosts, but also haints attached to them. And
Yeah,
again, the haints are never going to be positive, are never going to have, a positive word for you. They're troublesome,
yes,
and dark. Whereas there are other spirits and soul entanglements that create ghosts and other phenomena that get locked into those communities as well, that don't necessarily have that same sort of chaotic energy attached to them, but particularly in that part of the city.
yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought something followed us home from me and her went out and discovered, because just as much as her being from New York and an area of the city like that fascinated her, it fascinated me also, because we really didn't have all of that going on in the lower ninth ward across the industrial canal. And we
Mhm.
would walk for blocks and go inside the apothecaries. And I was thinking maybe something followed us home one day and came, because it definitely was a lot going on in that house. And our neighbor, we stayed upstairs, and our neighbor downstairs, she was an older woman, and she she was quite the character. Her name was Miss Rose, and she said she had been turning tricks since tricks was a nickel.
Yes, indeed.
And when
Not a
we
nickel.
first moved in the house, she let us know that a lot of strange stuff was happening, so much to the fact that there were holes in our floor. Remember, she stayed downstairs, where she called herself shooting Hanks. She was an old woman and she used that
Oh
word.
my.
And I brought it up to the landlord, and I was like, there's holes in our floor that somebody done shot through, and probably the roof leaks. But she told me she was going to kill them all. So the landlord had to come. All they did was put new linoleum. It wasn't the best house. But I had a fear that suppose one night she forget we moved up there, because the house, from what I was told, had been empty for a long time.
Yeah, I believe the Hanks are always attached to the property. Almost always attached to the property.
Well, Miss Rose sure believed it. And we had
Mhm.
experiences which of course didn't bother me because of the way I was raised, but it freaked out my roommate Micheline from New York, Buffalo, New York. And she said, I ain't never seen nothing like this in my life. I'm getting the hell out.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah,
But
I experienced and seen a lot Lola Noble in New York City as well, particularly Manhattan, and I think that has a lot to do with the architecture sort of being stacked in many ways. There, much like an archaeological site where you might, dig to go back in time or dig to, experience other um, archaeological, you know, footprints on a particular, plot of land. And I think even, where things are like torn down and then rebuilt, there's still a frequency there, a footprint there. It's real interesting. We now have satellites that can map the Earth from the sky and literally see the imprint of buildings and structures that no longer exist. And we're primarily talking about what wood and stone and earth. So it's a curiosity of mine in terms of what are they able to see in metropolitan areas like New York City, where you know building structures continue to be readapted, rebuilt upon, and then how that might be affecting the um, interdimensional spaces attached to that as it relates to Hanks and historic Hanks. Again, I think they're always attached to property, and then there's some history, some story that is also attached, even to that. And we're quickly running out of time. But I can remember going into Frederick Douglass property, which is something we would do at least twice a year growing up in the DMV. If you didn't go with your school, as some sort of field trip or outing, or your church or your Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, that sort of thing, which me and my youngest sister Wapani were both a part of. Then we went either on our own or, in the company of my mother. Same thing with George Washington's manor there in Virginia, someplace I spent at least 2 or 3 times a year in. And I would, even at the youngest age, see and experience and feel ghosts, but also Hanks. And Hanks have a smell. I don't know if you knew that or remember that, Val, but they can also
no,
have
I don't remember.
smell.
I don't remember the smells. We had a lot of farm animals, and the only thing I can really remember when it comes to smell was my mama's cooking and chickens. Chickens
Mhm, mhm,
smell, man. They have a unique smell. So I never picked up on the smell, but I do know I've moved to a lot of different houses over the years, and
mhm,
Spirit always told me if something was left in the house, like one house I moved in, um, there was a picture window and there was a piece of old cloth over the picture window. Spirit told me, don't take that down. You know how I like to decorate my house, Prince.
mhm, mhm.
And the
Yeah.
reason being was I was moving in with the new, and I didn't want to take everything away that the spirits in the house were familiar with.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
that eventually, over time, we could meld together without making any incidents. Like, I wouldn't make them angry by coming into a new house wiping everything out that they were familiar with. And I left that curtain, well, it really wasn't a curtain, it was a piece of uh, peach looking cloth up on my window for a year or so, and people didn't understand why I left it up there like that. And I said that was to appease the spirits in my house. Well, my spirit told me when the time was that I could take it down, and I took them down and replaced them with some beautiful African cloth curtains. But from that instance, I learned if you go and there's just one object, most people will get a new house and find one object that was left behind by the previous owners. Do not get rid of it. Just put it in a nice space. Whatever spirits in that house are accustomed to that, it becomes a comfort zone for them. And
And it
also,
became a key element in horror movies because, Poltergeist, for example, where they built this brand new housing development and community.
yes,
And it was only later on in the movie when you find out they had, done it on burial ground for Aboriginal and indigenous people. But in many of these movies, books, stories, there's often that theme of coming in to remodel or rebuild or create something new, effectively wiping the footprint of the past away before they really begin to, experience these hanks. Amityville Horror, one of the first horror books that I read from cover to cover, uh, without, practically taking a breath, was Amityville Horror before it became a movie,
yeah.
or a TV show. But they here you have again a family moving into a property. We're gonna paint it the way we want. We're gonna make these changes. We're gonna rip this out. We're gonna tear this up. And as you suggest, these spirits are disturbed. Sometimes these repairs are put in place to cover up, to clean up from these traumatic entanglements of the past. And we come in not knowing this, or the property sellers don't expose these stories, and so much so that in some states, I think in California, by law, you have to tell someone if the property has a history of being haunted.
And if somebody was murdered there, and if the property has ever been labeled as haunted, yes, you are
Mhm.
right. It's a couple of states like that.
Yes, indeed. And we live in a time now where people are, in fear of the haters and the jealous and the envious. But man, that third eye power is real. That
Yes.
dark desire to undo others, and it's a real thing. Now I have to come to the future show and talk about this whole notion of gang stalking. I have many reservations about gang stalking.
About what?
But gang stalking. It's somehow the notion that someone is being followed by a group of people or an organization, but certainly, you know, three or four or more people, even to the point that they, claim to move, relocate to other cities, other states, and still find themselves being, you know, quote unquote gang stalked for various reasons. Sometimes they suggest it's government agencies that could be doing the gang stalking. I think even before we had that kind of language for it, the first instance of it that pops up in my mind is Good Times, when Michael wrote that letter to the Cuban government and got a response, and uh, JJ lost his job, and James lost his job, and
Yes.
and then they started suspecting that they were being bugged and listened to by the CIA and the FBI and whatnot. But that was even before we started hearing this wording, this phraseology of gang stalking. In my memory, gang stalking is something that showed up in pop culture maybe in the last 7 years, maybe. And typically when I see it, you question the author. You begin to look at who's posting it, how are they, capturing it in terms of, noting it. What receipts do they have that they're really being, quote unquote, gang stalked?
Well, Prince, that could be talk for tomorrow. We are out of time. I want to thank everyone for coming, and we will see you tomorrow, the same
Yes,
place and time.
it'll be tight, but I'll be here.
Oh, yeah, I know you're really, really busy. And this being our rainy season with the
Ooh,
Jazz Fest, every time Jazz Fest comes,
it
it's
bring rain.
and I'm gonna speak on why I believe that is tomorrow. So don't let me forget, Prince, because that's something serious.
Greetings, Shawnice Bell. Thank you so much, beloved. Um, that's Shawnice without the U, because I have another client that's a Shawnice with the U. Thank you for coming through. D Goddess, thank you so much for your support. Lola Noble, thank you for your active participation in conversation. We certainly appreciate you. And those who continue to listen and support us by way of social media. Thank you, the Goddess Initiative, for sometimes being my pop cultural memory bank. Thank you so much for your continued support, D Goddess. Thank you so much for coming through, and I look forward to sitting with you again on tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time for more revolutionary hoodoo, New Orleans voodoo secrets and recipes. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Ashe, ashe.
Ashe,
Good night, everyone.
peace and blessings, everyone. Good night.
At the beginning of this, maybe I was more skeptical. As the days have gone on, I'm not sure what I think anymore.
I felt that maybe it wouldn't affect me if I personally didn't believe in it.
So, knowing what you know now, would you still get cursed?
I'm seeking out a curse, a hex to put on myself.
A curse could end your life. You're literally begging the devil to knock on your door just to prove to you that God's real.
He could curse you with stupidity, but we think you've got that down.
Despite the warnings, I'm investigating the real-world effects of dark magic.
Looks like you have a lot of love and a lot of opportunity. You are going to cause damage to that.
How do you feel after doing this?
Evil.
That must be quite seductive.
That's the power you're calling on. The devil, right? Quite seductive.
I'm going to enter into a pact with Satan.
Señor Satán, Lucifer, presentamos a este hermano. Con tu fuego purifica.
Wyong is pretty much the epicenter of all black magic. People are very scared to even talk about it.
Y'all better not call me at 2 o'clock in the morning talking about this man is dead. I don't want to hear that.
I have this physical feeling that something bad is coming. What have I done?
You're going to have to find faith in this in order to undo it.